Hey folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and if you're anything like me, then you watched the trailers for the Minecraft movie and thought, but why? You see, I happen to adore the design of all the characters shown so far, but I'm baffled as to why Jack Black and company are just normal people. So I set out to fix that. You see, I'm more than happy having Jack Black play Jack Black pretending to be Steve, but I feel like they really missed a trick by not having him turn into a blocky rendition of Jack Black the second he stepped through the portal. Really, what I mean to say is that Jack Black should have become Jack Block. Of course, in order to make this incredible rendition of Jack Block, I'm gonna need a little block to build his blocky head on top of, which I can do by breaking myself off a little cubular chunk of wood that can be wrapped in a slab of pale fleshy clay. Once all 6 sides are covered, I can blend the edges into one another to create a lovely little meat cube that I can carve a little space into the bottom of so I can drill a hole into the center and mount it on a bit of dowel. I can use the dowel as a head handle, which will make blending and smoothing the surface of my meat cube without adding fingerprints to the surface a little bit easier. Then once I've got a little featureless fleshy block, I can mark out the mouth and poke some big divots for eyes, filling said eye divots with eyeballs and building up the cheeks and chin, as well as adding those patented Jack Black-esque over-exaggerated eyebrows. The nose starts as a little teardrop with a couple balls added onto the sides and blended in, then I can poke some sniffing holes into the bottoms before moving on to enwrinkling the rest of the face. I'll toss a little red tongue onto the mouth, then build up the top row of teeth from a single white wormy dealy squished onto the inside of the upper lip. Then I can finish off the face by adding some extra thick cheeks and building out the chin. I want to keep the general blocky shape of everything while still adding the necessary chubby cheek detail where possible. Finally, a little smoothing with a clay shaper and some extra wrinkles with a sharper clay shaper, and I can give the whole thing a thick brushing of isopropyl alcohol to remove the sharper edges and any of the remaining fingerprints. Then for a last little bit of surface detail, I'll poke the still soft alcohol-imbued clay with the tip of a soft brush to impart a teeny tiny bit of pory skin texture, then is into the oven to bake while I get to work building Jack Block's blocky body. To build the body, I'll build some blocky aluminium bones by wrapping a big chunk of foil into a loose ball, then beating it ever so gently with my mallet to make a little shiny core that I can build Jack's blocky belly on top of. I'm only going to cover the front of the aluminium core since he's going to be wearing a mostly movie-accurate version of his blue jumper, but I thought why not take this opportunity to have his ample belly hanging out the bottom of the shirt, so I'll sculpt his fleshy rotundity, sticking with a mostly blocky build and adding a teeny tiny belly button that may or may not end up being on display. I'll then poke some holes in the bottom of the shiny brick so I can fit a pair of double wound extra strong armature wire legs that I'll wrap in another length of armature wire for added support before adding a final third wire to each leg that will allow Jack Block to remain upright under his own strength. I hope. In the meantime, to help him stand tall while I work on the rest of the body, I'll begin by smooshing his wiry feet onto a couple lumps of black clay pressed firmly into my well-loved baking tray. The hope is that as the clay bakes, it'll stick to the year's worth of built-up inseparable clay residue covering the top of the tray, keeping him firmly attached. I'll turn these little black lumps into a pair of simple black loafers, then I can start thickening up his thighs, quads, calves, crotch, and buttocks, adding clay as needed until I've got a pair of thick blue jean blue pants. I'll then wrap the bottoms in some squared off clay to create a more open cuff, and I can start squaring off the jeans to match the rest of the almost blocky, semi-realistic Minecraft aesthetic that 98% of the Minecraft movie seems to have gone with. With the legs looking adequately lumpy, I can take this fabric offcut and use it to give the pants a more jean-like texture by pressing it firmly into the surface. I'll then add the seams up the sides and down the middle of the jeans before adding a pair of pockets to each side, then the fly in the middle and a pair of pockets on the back side before working my way around the entire lower half, adding lots of wrinkles and fabric folds with a silicone shaper and some rounded metal sculpting tools. Now with Jack Block's blocky bottom half oven baked, I can begin working on his lighter blue jumper or sweater for my international viewers, covering the majority of the upper body, leaving just a little bit of belly hanging out the bottom. I'll then square this clay off so as to keep to that blocky design before adding a little V-neck in the front to delineate the jumper from his similarly colored blue turtleneck beneath. With the neckline in place, I can poke a hole down into the soft aluminium core beneath so I can fit a little length of slightly bent armature wire onto the torso and wrap that in a lump of pale flesh-colored clay, onto which I can smoosh Jack Block's head, pressing the clay outwards to create his neck. A little refinement will refine the shape, and I can add some texture to the shirt by way of a slightly different bit of fabric. Rolling some ball styluses across the fabric will add some soft ripples in the shirt, and I can cover half of the exposed neck in some more blue clay to create the neck of the turtleneck. Then it's into the oven to bake once again, so I have a hard surface I can drill into to fit some thick armature wire arms that can be cut to size. I'll then wrap the top portion of the arm in a blocky blob of sweatshirt blue clay and wrap the remainder of the arm in a fleshy pale colored clay to create his exposed arm and hands. This all gets squared off in accordance with the blocky laws of Minecraft lore, and I can begin adding little bits of detail like cuboid elbows and rolled up fabric around the arms. Otherwise, that's about as far as I can get before making the hands, and before I make the hands, I need to make something for Jack Block to hold. And I figured what's more Minecraft than a pickaxe, but in keeping with the Minecraft movie theme, I went with the slightly more detailed but still hella blocky movie design, which I printed out to scale so that I can use it as a template to cut out progressively smaller pieces, removing the outermost blocks, which leaves me with a tray of thin pickaxe bits ready to be baked. Once they're cured and cooled, I can peel them off the tray and stick them together with an extra thick helping of bacon bond before baking it again to cure the glue, at which point I can use a teeny tiny file to clean up the edges. I'll then drill a little hole into the middle of the underside so I can fit another length of armature wire that I'll cover in brown clay and, again as is the theme here, square off the edges before texturing it to make it kinda look at least a little bit woody. I'll then add a little brown tip to the top and square that off as well, then it's ready to be handed off to Jack Block so I can finally make his fists. I'll press the handle of the pickaxe into the soft, malleable, fingerless blob of Jack's hand, then start making the details on top. I want to keep the hand as blocky as the rest of the body, but I still need to make some clearly defined fingers cause fingers are generally a pretty important part of hand anatomy, so once I've carved some knuckles onto the bottom of the fist, I'll work on adding the fingers to the underside before adding a thumb on top, just barely breaking free from the blocky form of the fist. I'll then do the same thing for the other hand, but, this time without a pickaxe. Finally, I can work my way around the rest of the limbs, adding the little bits of wrinkles and skin folds here and there before finally moving my way up to Jack's head to add some much needed hair. I'll start by painting his cubic dome with plenty of bacon bond before beginning the embearding process by sticking bits of dark brown, nearly black clay to build up his beard, mustache, eyebrows, and initial blobby layers of hair. Once I've got the general shape and thickness blocked out, I can come back with some finer detailing tools to add some finer details like the strands of hair. Now, I never really like adding hair in clay since I haven't quite figured out a good, easy way to make hair look right. I know there's lots of ways to make it look great, but they take like hours and hours of work, and I'm more of a how can I get this to look the best it can in the absolute least amount of time possible type of sculptor, so hair's still a work in progress. To be entirely honest, I liked the undefined hair without any detail, but I figured if this is going to be a semi-realistic Jack Block, then I need something, and this'll have to do. Otherwise, with the hair in place, that's Jack looking, I think, at least kind of a little bit sort of somewhat recognizable, all things considered, so it's time to add a little bit of depth. I really like the color of this clay as a base tone for Jack's skin, and it's got just enough translucency to give off an almost fleshy appearance, so all I want to do is slightly tint it and add some imperfections by applying some super thin, extra watery washes in the recess and wrinkles, which I can then feather out with a dry brush to remove any harsh lines. I'll do the same thing for the rest of his exposed, fleshy bits, mixing in some reds and browns, feathering it out as I go. I want to try something a bit different this time to see if I can make the added colors look like they're under the skin rather than painted on top, so I'm going to take out my little container of Bacon Bond and use a small stiff brush to apply it in a messy, stippling motion over every bit of Jack's exposed skin. The idea here is that once it bakes, it's pretty much clear, but it'll add a teeny tiny layer on top that'll tie all the colors underneath into one another and create a hopefully natural looking look. And I think it turned out pretty well, certainly well enough to experiment some more in the future. For now, I can pop Jack off the baking tray and get to painting the rest. Except I seriously underestimated the sheer sticking power of those black shoes, and it took a shocking amount of effort to dislodge him, which eventually resulted in me cutting a portion of his loafer off by accident. But hey, good news is that he's perfectly balanced otherwise. A little CA glue will get the shoe back where it ought to be, and I can get on to adding some detail to his clothes, starting with a darker turquoise for his top and a darker blue jean blue for his blue jeans. By the time the jeans have been painted, his shirt's dry and ready for a few aggressively applied dry brushings of progressively lighter blues on top, then some lighter blues on the blue jeans applied in the same way to make him look a little tattered and worn. I'll give the handle of the pickaxe a mahogany wash while the head gets a once-over in stone. Then it's back to the handle for a soft light brown highlight while the head gets something similar but with a much lighter gray. Onto Jack's hair, I'll give the whole thing a once-over with a black wash for shading, then I'll work my way around his beard adding the gray highlights in the middle and along the sides before dry brushing some grays through the remainder of his hair since old Jackie Black ain't so young anymore. Finally, I can give his eyes a base coat of white to clean up any of the previous stage's overspills, then I'll paint some great big oversized brown irises in the middle, adding lots of messy little lines and lighter browns to create the little lines. I don't know what they're called. Then I'll wash the whole iris in a brown glaze to tie the colors together before giving each eye a big black pupil in the center. Finally, to bring the eyes to life and make Jack look like an almost living cubic version of himself, I'll paint the eyes with a thick layer of UV resin. The absolute last thing I want to do then is get rid of any of the shine on his shirt and pants, which I can easily do by painting it all with a layer of ultra matte varnish. With that though, Jack Black is officially Jack Block and looking good enough. All he needs now is something to stand on, and I know just the thing. I want to make him some stone blocks to stand on, and I've got this block of foam that's just about the perfect thickness, so I'll cut it down to size with my hot wire table, then mark out the center so I can separate it into 4 equally sized half blocks, then give the whole thing a dark gray base coat. Now, my next idea, rather than try and paint the squares onto the block in a repeating pattern, was just to print out the design and glue it onto the block, except my printer ran out of ink and I don't have enough to cover all the blocks, so I guess it's back to painting. Fortunately, a little knife work will turn these blocky designs into perfect little stone stencils. I'll place one of the stencils on a square, then tape off the surrounding blocks so that I can blast the stencil with some lighter gray through the airbrush without blasting the surrounding stones as well. I'll then repeat this process on all the other blocks, keeping the orientation of the stencil the same way around to create the repeating pattern before tossing that stencil aside and doing the same thing with the other stencil using a different shade of gray. A final blast with the lighter gray will tie the shades together, and that's my quad stone block plinth built and ready for a blocky Jack Black to stand triumphantly atop. And with that, we're all done here and on to the glamour shots. As always, a big ol' thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon, and a special hey how are you to the newest of them, the Transformers guy down the road, Radioactive Ghost, Zippy the Squid, Ryan Drago, Masked Podcasters, Jimmy and Stevie, Stop Watching YouTube and Go to Bed, Oliver Hemsley, Beauty and the Palm Tree, Burr Marie, Painting Yoshi, Holly Elizabeth. It is the year 2005. The treacherous Decepticons have conquered the Autobots' home planet of Cybertron, and DJ Toast. You are the big stone blocks upon which this meat-cubed man of a channel stands. As always, do the thing and hit the stuff and whatever else. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.